with a very special The Right Has Left report because this particular podcast, I just want to focus on one topic and one topic only on this podcast. I'm going to dedicate this entire podcast to that topic, and that topic is the Canadians and why the significant drop in Canadians not visiting Florida this year, or as snowbirds, not even wintering down here. I got into this topic because I typically, as a just kind of a fun sideline, like to count the number of Canadian license plates that I see down here in my particular area on the East Coast in Florida. And this winter, and with the Christmas vacation already pretty much done and over with, that pretty much gives you a signal how many Canadians are actually coming down here. I counted 6 license plates, 6, and those are specifically pretty much from Ontario. Now, last year I counted well over 40 different license plates with different numbers. Because when you go to the tiki bar and stuff, you visit with your Canadian friends. They are not coming down this year. They are not coming down at all, hardly. And those who are coming down probably have a few bucks, or they still own property here, or they still have their spot reserved in the, travel trailer areas where they bring down their RVs or their camper trailers and they stay in those for the winter. But so I wanted to kind of do a deep dive and get into that. And here's what I found. And this is going to shock you. And I'm not only going to talk about, the Canadians in specific, but I'm also going to talk to you a little bit later about Kentucky distillery, Jim Beam. And you're going to find that kind of interesting as well. But first, let's get into Florida. Now, Florida is losing a significant revenue due to fewer Canadians visiting in 2025, with early estimates suggesting potential losses in the tens of hundreds of millions of dollars impacting South Florida businesses. Now, that's pretty bad. That's a lot of money. Now, for the U.S. overall, with Canadian visitors, it's billions of dollars. Specific Florida figures, of course, do vary a little bit, with drops of 10 to 20% in visitors or bookings for areas like Fort Lauderdale and Orlando, with some hotels seeing major dips in flights down significantly. Though overall Florida tourism might still rise due to other markets, specifically Portugal and Colombia. Key figures and trends: general decline. Canadian travels to the U.S. is down significantly, with some reports showing as much as a 20% decrease in Canadian visitors to the U.S. and overall international spending projected to drop by as much as 13%. Now, South Florida impact, the greater Fort Lauderdale area, which came in with their figures, expected less than 150,000 fewer Canadian visitors, potentially costing up to $90 million, with some businesses experiencing drops in Canadian numbers by 10 to 16% or more. The airport data for like Fort Lauderdale, Hollywood, their drops were 15%. In Orlando, their drops was 9% for Canadian visitors so far when these figures came out. I'm sure it's higher now. And that was with early arrivals. Typically, Canadians start coming down here around October, okay, when the air temperature up there starts dropping. And they haven't seen those, huge increases. Now, Fort Myers and Palm Beach areas, they've saw steeper declines. Booking slump. Airlines reported booking declines for U.S. Florida routes from Canada, with one aviation firm noting a 76% drop in April bookings compared to the prior year, though this was for the entire U.S. market, not just Florida. I'm going to interrupt you there because I want to talk to you a little bit about something. Now, an airport close to me, which is the Melbourne International Airport, they have charter Canadian flights typically in the wintertime starting around just after Thanksgiving from Toronto as well as the Ontario area. And they said that even their flights are down, and to the point to where, Air Canada, might have to take a different look at their routes that they run seasonally from Canada to Florida, because their bookings are also way down. Now, getting back to this, a growing number of Canadians are divesting from Florida with real estate. Now, you may not know that, but a lot of Canadians have been buying real estate so they can have their second homes here when they come down here as snowbirds in the winter. And of course, just like everybody else, they pay their property taxes. They own this land. They own their homes. And now a lot of Canadians are saying, going to real estate agents and say, I want to sell out, man. Screw you guys. And so Florida real estate, besides canceling their travel to the area, they're putting their homes and their property up for sale. And this is all because of the trade tensions rising from ownership costs and a polarizing political climate. Now, recent data from Royal LePage indicates that 54% of Canadians who own residential property in the United States are considering selling within the next year. Reasons for the sell-off trade, of course, are the tensions and the tariffs. That's right, the tariffs, all from this guy, Donald Trump. The implementation and aggressive tariffs, including a 25% tariff on Canadian and Mexican imports, has sourced diplomatic relations and increased the cost of living for seasonal residents. And, of course, the political environment. Approximately 62% of Canadians planning to sell cite the current U.S. administration as their primary concern. Many Canadians feel unwelcomed due to the new immigration registration rules and rhetoric viewing Canada as a 50% state, as this guy likes to say all the time. Donald Trump says he wants Canada as their 51st state. And of course, the Canadians are saying, screw you. That is such a stupid thing to say. And of course, the other thing is the rising cost of ownership. Property owners are facing a sharp increase in holding costs, specifically high insurance premiums and more stringent condo regulations following recent structural safety mandates. And the new travel regulations, which is costing Canadians anywhere from $60 to as much as $300 per person to even cross the border now. Some regions, particularly Southwest Florida, have seen a mass exodus following the introduction of mandatory background checks and fingerprinting for visitors staying more than 30 days in the United States. Tremendous fluctuations in the exchange rate also is starting to come into play between the United States and Canadian dollars, having made maintaining properties in the U.S. significantly more expensive for Canadians. Now, the economic impact on the Florida housing market, real estate agents report that Canadian listings have tripled in some areas, with some sellers looking to offload properties at any cost, even if they have to lose money. That's scary, ladies and gentlemen. That is scary. Now, besides the tourism decline, Canadians represent about 41% of all foreign buyers in Florida, where the state's top source of international tourists, 3.3 million in 2024. Widespread trip cancellations are negatively impacting the vacation rental market and local retail revenues here in the state of Florida. Now, and many of them are just choosing alternative destinations to go to for wintering besides the United States. And you know where they're going? They're going to places like Mexico and Portugal, where they're more welcome and don't have all these tariffs. Canadian homeowners have long been the biggest foreign investors in U.S. property and are now selling off their Florida homes amid mounting trade frictions. And this is what's sad is, you people don't get it. When I say you people, you Republicans, you don't understand the high impact that this is having here on the state of Florida. You're all thinking, la-di-da, they're still coming, da-da-da. So you see a few Canadian license plates, and so you say, well, there's a few Canadian license plates here, so they must still be coming down by the thousands just because you see a few more wealthy Canadians who are willing to pay the price to come down here. Not everybody else is doing that. They're saying, we'll either stay up in Canada in winter, or as you just saw this report, they're going to Mexico or Portugal. They are telling the U.S., so you do get it, don't you? Yeah, I hope you do. And like I said, they're selling off their properties no matter what. Recent real estate agent had a media blitz, and she was talking to some media. Her name is Sonata Adsman, and she says some of these are quotes I'm going to give to her. She says they feel like it's the perfect time for them to sell. Canadians make up 13% of all foreign buyers in the United States real estate. In recent months, there's been a decline in Canadian buyer searches in Florida, according to Realtor.com. And Adzim, who's seen a surge in calls from her Canadian clients, notes that three primary reasons for wanting to leave the Sunshine State, of course, is increased costs of holding Florida real estate because of what the taxes are putting on them. And another two reason is she feels like the trade tensions between the United States and Canada is getting out of control. And she says we're seeing exchange rates between the U.S. and Canadian dollars also have impacted that decision. And then, very importantly, on a personal note, they feel like there's a perception that they're just not welcome here in the United States anymore. That's sad. We have always had a great love for our friends to the north, the Canadians. You know, they have fought by us side by side in World Wars II and I and other wars. And Trump has just basically tried to destroy that relationship, feeling like the Canadians owe us, we don't owe them. And that is sad. And so, therefore, they're just selling their properties and say, fine, we'll just get the hell out. And, of course, this real estate agent has said, I've always tried to reassure him that it's absolutely not the case, but I think sometimes the perception feels like reality. Most recently, President Donald Trump called off trade negotiations with Canada after it used former President Ronald Reagan's words about tariffs as a swipe against Trump's policies in Canada, which champions some protection policies of its own. Trump imposed an additional 10% tariff on Canadian imports in response, on top of an already existing 35% levy, 25% automotive surtax, 40% transshipment penalty, and new immigration registration rules for Canadians in the U.S. They just said, the heck with you. And when we're speaking to our Canadian clients, they feel like the overall tension between Canada and the United States as it relates to negotiations and economic policies make them feel that there's definitely a concern, as Dim noted. Volatile exchange rates between the U.S. and Canadian dollars are also weighing heavily, with one Canadian dollar worth about 72 U.S. cents as of Wednesday, this past Wednesday. So when it comes down to the cost of carrying U.S. real estate, particularly when they have to pay with Canadian dollars, which has had a lot of fluctuations against American dollars, a lot of the snowbirds that we've worked with feel like it's just gotten quite costly to continue enjoying all of their winters here in Florida. Now, as I say that, check out the Canadian Premier, Doug Ford. He says Canadians boycotting Florida vacations are hurting them down there. And that is so true. Because when you look at him and Donald Trump, they are just going back and forth. Trump refuses to concede. As you know, Donald Trump refuses to lose. He refuses to compromise. It's my way or the highway. It's always that way with Donald Trump. And therefore, you have these tensions between the United States and Canada. And that, to me, that's just so sad. Now, we're going to go back to the state of Florida and talk a little bit about Governor Ron DeSantis here. Now, he continues to dismiss reports that Canadians will stay away from Florida as a backlash to President Donald Trump's tariffs and threats to annex Canada. He just blows it all off like, they're coming down here. What are you talking about? Now, during an appearance Monday when he was at the Florida's Realtors Organization in Orlando, DeSantis recounted a recent trip with his family to Legoland in Winter Haven as he tried to dispel the notion that Canadians were scaling back vacation plans. Here's what he says. I was with my kids, we were down at spring break and we're at Legoland and all these people were coming up to me with pictures, which is fine. I normally do that. And I'd say like 80% of them were Canadians, DeSantis said. And I'm like, I thought you guys weren't coming to Florida anymore. And they said, oh no, we love Florida. We're going to continue to be a destination here. While at the Capitol on Tuesday, DeSantis repeated the Legoland experience and added he expects Florida to continue to be a tourist hotspot for the Canadians. And as I said, Canadians account for about a quarter of the international travelers to Florida. The estimated 3.271 million Canadians who made their way to Florida in 2024 was 1.2% more than in 2023. And that was before, of course, Trump started this rhetoric and uptick on the tariffs at about 20% below the number in 2019. 2019. Did you get that? Now, the last full year before the COVID-19 pandemic slammed the tourism industry. Keep that in mind. Now, the Miami Herald reported just this past Monday the demand for flights from Canada to South Florida are down, as I just talked to you earlier, about 20%, Ron DeSantis, from a year ago. Also, the research firm Tourism Economics altered its forecast for travel to the United States this year from nearly 9% growth to a 5.1% decline. And so, when I give you that talk about Governor Ron DeSantis and his little trip to Legoland during the spring break that past year, and he said the Canadians were just going to come down in droves, and they love Florida. As you can see, I think Ron DeSantis was a little bit misled, or he's lying, all right? Because the Canadians are not coming down here, all right? I can tell by license plate count, and I mean, not just here where I live, but I do a little bit of traveling, and I'm not seeing the license plates from our friends up north as we typically have seen. So, and as I wrap up this little report that I'm talking about, I want you to take a look at this recent news break from Jim Beam. You're going to say, well, Roy, what the hell does whiskey got to do with anything with Florida? Well, it has nothing to do with Florida, but it still ties in with what I'm talking about here with the Canadians. Now, Jim Beam Distillery is shutting down their Kentucky distillery due to more product than demand. In other words, they've got more whiskey sitting around than they got people buying it. Why? Because a large portion of the problem is the Canadian boycotting imports of their product. That is correct. The Canadians make up a large portion of their exports from the U.S. to Canada. And here's what you're seeing in the Canadian liquor stores. Buy Canadian instead. And when you got Canada boycotting U.S. products such as Jim Beam whiskey, this is what you're getting, all right? So, and it's going to be remain of a boycott. Now, the distillery will keep open for visitors and for sample testing, but they are shutting down production of their whiskey because they've got more product than people are buying. You know, they can't depend on everybody in the U.S. buying. Now, we'll give you a little bit of a transparency here. Also, a lot of people are stopping, and are not really drinking a lot of hard liquor anymore due to health reasons. That's cutting back a little bit. But the main thing is their exports to Canada made up a lot of portion of their profit for, making money and getting the whiskey out there. And Canada has stopped importing, of course, not only Jim Beam, but Jack Daniels and all the rest of bourbon and whiskeys that's made here in the U.S. They've just said, screw it. We're not, as long as you're going to put in these tariffs off, we're not going to buy from you guys anything. And so it's just that, and of course, health reasons. But, they made up 12% of their sales of their imports to Canada. All right. So, and again, Canadians are upset with Donald Trump's policies and rhetoric, leading to them avoiding spending money in the U.S. and not importing any products from the United States. Donald Trump doesn't seem to give a crap. He still wants to put the tariffs on them, and he still wants Canada as their 51st state. So there you go. I had to do a special report on this because it's important. All right. I love our Canadian friends to the north. I've talked to a lot of them. They have come down here. They spend a lot of money, and I'm talking a lot of money when they come down here. Yes, there are still some Canadians down here wintering as snowbirds because, they have made a lot of friends here. It's not just so much property ownership, but they have made true friends down here, and they don't want to abandon them. And so they do their utmost, even with having to pay more to get across the border and having to put up with the background checks and stuff because Trump thinks they're all crooks and everything else, and we've never done that with Canadians. We've been able to typically cross each other's borders without any hassle at all. And now you've got this coming down where, he wants to keep track of all of them. You're talking seniors, ladies and gentlemen. Most of these snowbirds, they're retired folks. They're not thugs, criminals out to get anybody, and yet they still have to be treated like everybody else and as such. And to me, it's just flat sad. And Florida is losing money. And, of course, you're going to say, well, let's make it up somewhere else, The heck with Canada. And that's a piss poor attitude to have, And same with Mexico, But I just wanted to point it out how much money the state of Florida is losing this year because of all the BS that's put into place for our Canadian friends. and you think that they're just going to be submissive to us, you've got another thing coming. They say, fine, you don't want us in Florida, we won't come. We'll go somewhere else. We'll go to Portugal and we'll go to Mexico, to where it's warm, just as warm there in the winter as it is anywhere else in the United States, or specifically Florida. So there you go. That's my special report on the Right Has Left podcast. I'm Roy Garden. I hope you enjoyed this information, and I do look forward to your comments. Until then, you take care, and I do hope that you have a happy new year.